It was past midnight in Manhattan, yet Claire Vaughan sat in the dim light of her small apartment, her laptop screen the only thing illuminating the darkened room. Her shoulders drooped from exhaustion, the weight of hopelessness pressing down on her chest like an iron hand. Around her, silence reigned, except for the occasional distant sound of car horns far below. The cursor blinked on an email she had typed but couldn't bring herself to send, another desperate plea to a charity. Another request for help that she already knew would be denied. She had exhausted every avenue she could think of, every charity, every bank, every distant acquaintance, and yet the answer had been the same. We're sorry, but we cannot assist. Her gaze drifted to the photograph perched precariously on the bookshelf. Her mother, Margaret Vaughan, smiling warmly despite the frailty that had started to consume her life. Claire's heart twisted painfully. Margaret was lying in a hospital bed tonight, a breath away from slipping through her fingers. The doctors had been clear. Without immediate surgery, her mother wouldn't survive the next 2 weeks. And the cost? Astronomical. Far more than Claire could dream of gathering, even if she sold everything she owned 100 times over. Claire was not a woman easily broken. Life had demanded strength from her since childhood, and she had always delivered. After her father's death, it had been just her and her mother against the world. Margaret had worked tirelessly to raise her, teaching her that integrity was worth more than gold, that kindness could light even the darkest paths. Claire had lived by those teachings, even when the world showed her little kindness in return. But tonight the walls were closing in. Her fingers trembled as she shut the laptop. There was nothing more she could do. She had taken every extra shift she could find, even ones that left her dragging her feet home at dawn. She had sold her old car, her jewelry, even the books she had loved since childhood, each object a memory, now sacrificed at the altar of desperation. And still, it wasn't enough. Standing up, she wrapped her arms around herself and crossed to the window. Manhattan's skyline shimmered in the distance, a cruel contrast to the emptiness clawing inside her. Somewhere in those glittering towers, people lived lives untouched by the kind of fear that now suffocated her. Claire closed her eyes, pressing her forehead to the cold glass. "There has to be another way," she whispered. Her voice was barely a thread of sound, carried away by the vastness outside. Little did she know, fate was already weaving an answer into her life. An answer wrapped in promises, risks, and a man she had never meant to meet. The Grand Aurora Hotel in Manhattan was ablaze with light and laughter that night, hosting a charity gala so grand that even the city's jaded elite found themselves impressed. The towering chandeliers, the river of champagne, the silk gowns flowing like water. All of it created an atmosphere thick with opulence. Claire had never felt more out of place. Dressed in a borrowed uniform too tight at the waist and carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres, she moved silently among the glittering guests. No one noticed her. To them she was invisible, just another server blending into the background. And that was exactly how she preferred it. She needed the money. One night of work here would pay almost a week's worth of hospital bills. It was humiliating, yes, but her pride had long since become a luxury she couldn't afford. Smile, her manager had barked earlier. These people didn't pay to look at frowns. So Claire smiled, an empty, brittle curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes, as she offered trays to the rich and powerful, all while her mind remained in a hospital room blocks away by her mother's side. She didn't notice the shift in the air at first, didn't see the way conversations subtly hushed, the way heads turned. But then she felt it, a weight, a gaze so intense it seemed to burn through the crowded room and settle directly on her. She looked up and locked eyes with him. Lucas Sterling. He was a name whispered across boardrooms and cocktail parties, a man whose fortunes had been made with a ruthlessness that left entire industries trembling. Billionaire, CEO, kingmaker. His reputation preceded him, a storm cloud of power and precision. But none of that prepared Claire for the raw impact of seeing him in person. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a midnight black suit that seemed tailored to the very shape of his ambition, Lucas Sterling stood at the entrance like he owned not just the room, but the city itself. His dark hair was swept back with effortless style, revealing the kind of bone structure sculpted by generations of privilege and grit. But it was his eyes, sharp, stormy grey, that truly held her captive. Eyes that didn't just look. They saw. Their gaze locked, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. Claire quickly dropped her eyes, pretending to adjust her tray, heart hammering against her ribs. She moved on, weaving through the guests with mechanical precision, desperate to escape the sudden heat crawling up her neck. But fate wasn't done yet. Minutes later, she found herself cornered near the bar, trapped by a crush of bodies. And, before she could slip away, he was there, standing in front of her like a solid wall of intensity. "Name?" he asked, voice smooth and deep, tinged with an arrogance that made her bristle. "I'm just a server, sir," Clare replied tightly, keeping her gaze firmly on a point beyond his shoulder. Lucas chuckled, low and dangerous. "I didn't ask your job title." Slowly, painfully, Clare lifted her chin and met his eyes. "Clare," she said, her voice steady despite the pulse thrumming wildly at her throat. "Clare," he repeated, savoring the name like a secret. "Beautiful name. It suits you." She wanted to roll her eyes, to dismiss him as just another entitled man used to getting what he wanted. But there was something different about Lucas Sterling, a weariness beneath the charm, a shadow behind the smile. "I have work to do," she said briskly, trying to step around him. But Lucas moved, not blocking her, but guiding her with an effortless shift of his body. "You're different," he murmured, studying her. "You're not impressed, not intimidated." Clare swallowed hard. "Should I be?" A smile ghosted across his lips, genuine this time. "Most people are." For a moment something flickered between them, something raw and unsettling. But then Clare remembered where she was, who she was, and who he was. She gave a tight nod and slipped away into the crowd. Yet even as she disappeared into the sea of silk and champagne, Clare felt Lucas's gaze lingering on her like a brand. And deep down she knew her life had just crossed a threshold. She just didn't know yet what it would cost her. That night, as Clare peeled off her uniform and sank into bed exhausted, she thought about Lucas Sterling far more than she cared to admit. She reminded herself that men like him didn't see women like her. She was a nobody, a shadow. Still sleep evaded her, because deep down she had seen something in his eyes, something rare, something dangerous, and she had the sinking feeling that Lucas Sterling wasn't done with her yet, not by a long shot. The days after the gala felt like walking through a dream Clare couldn't wake up from. Work shifted back to its usual drudgery. Early mornings, late nights, empty trays and aching feet. Yet her mind wasn't present. It drifted again and again to Lucas Sterling. His eyes had followed her long after she had escaped the golden ballroom, burned into her memory with frightening clarity. She told herself it meant nothing. He was a billionaire who would have forgotten her the moment champagne touched his lips. But fate was never so simple. Clare was pouring coffee at the diner 3 days later when the first sign appeared. A man in a sharply pressed suit, far too polished for the greasy boot he slid into, ordered nothing but black coffee and slipped her an envelope under his saucer. She hesitated before picking it up, frowning at the simple white exterior. No markings, no name. Inside was a business card, weighted thick like velvet in her hands. Embossed on it, Lucas Sterling. A number. Nothing else. She felt the world narrow to a pinpoint. The man left without another word. Her hands trembled as she tucked the card into her apron and finished her shift with a mechanical stiffness that her co-workers didn't miss. Clare knew she should ignore it, toss it into the trash along with the day's coffee grounds. But when her shift ended and she walked out into the biting chill of the Manhattan night, her fingers found the card again, as if drawn by an invisible force. She stared at it for a long minute under a flickering street lamp before dialing the number. The line rang once, then twice, and then his voice. "Claire," Lucas said, low and certain, as if he had known it would be her all along. "I have a proposition." Her throat tightened. "I'm not interested," she said quickly, the words too fast, too defensive. "You haven't heard it yet." "I don't need to." There was a pause. A weighted silence that told her he wasn't the kind of man who heard no often, or easily. "You need money," Lucas said finally, voice smooth as silk but cutting to the bone. "I have it." Claire's heart clenched. She hated how naked her desperation must have looked at the gala. Hated even more that he wasn't wrong. "My mother," she began, then clamped her mouth shut. No, he didn't deserve that piece of her. Lucas didn't press. He simply continued, calm and relentless. "One night, no strings, $1 million. The world spun. Claire pressed a hand against the brick wall behind her, needing something solid to keep her from falling. "You're insane," she managed to whisper. Maybe, he said, but I'm offering you exactly what you need. No games, no tricks. Just one night. Claire squeezed her eyes shut. She thought of the hospital bills stacking up like a fortress she could never climb. She thought of her mother's weak smiles, her brave front even as her body betrayed her. And she thought of herself, standing here, broken, out of options. I don't sell myself, she whispered. This isn't about that, Lucas said quietly. This is about survival. And God help her. A part of her believed him. The call ended. No promises were made. No deals were struck. But a seed had been planted, dark and impossible to uproot. The next day, Claire found herself standing outside an address she had promised. Herself she wouldn't visit. The sterling penthouse loomed above her, a gleaming tower of steel and glass that seemed more fortress than home. Every rational part of her screamed to turn around, to run back to the familiar misery of her old life. But desperation had a gravity all its own, and Claire was powerless against it. She rang the bell. Moments later, the door opened. Lucas stood. There, not in a suit this time, but in dark jeans and a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms. He was barefoot, casual, and somehow even more dangerous than before. Claire, he said, stepping aside. Come in. She crossed the threshold like a woman walking into her own execution. The penthouse was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Manhattan's skyline, polished marble floors, walls adorned with modern art that probably cost more than her entire education. And yet it felt sterile, empty, like no one really lived here. Drink, Lucas offered, moving toward the kitchen. Claire shook her head, her voice stuck in her throat. Lucas poured himself a whiskey, not pushing her to speak. He leaned against the counter, watching her with those unreadable grey eyes. I want to be clear, she said finally, forcing the words out. If I agree to this, there are rules. He raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. No touching without permission. No. Demands I can't refuse. If I say stop, you stop. Lucas's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. Agreed. And after tonight, we are nothing. I walk away. You don't look for me. His smile faded entirely. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Agreed, he said again. Claire exhaled, her chest aching from the strain of holding herself upright. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small contract she had printed earlier. Simple, blunt. She needed something, anything, to feel like she had control over this madness. Lucas took it, scanned it once, and without hesitation signed. His name at the bottom. It was done. No turning back. The first touch startled her more than it should have. It wasn't rough, or Lucas brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering just long enough to make her breath catch. His hand was warm, grounding, not the icy grasp she had imagined. You're shaking, he murmured. Claire swallowed hard. I'm fine. He tilted her chin up with two fingers, forcing her to meet his gaze. No, he said softly. You're not. And somehow that quiet acknowledgement unraveled something deep inside her. Because no one had seen her, not really, in a very long time. Lucas didn't rush her. He didn't drag her to the bedroom like a transaction. Instead, he led her to the couch, poured another drink, and sat beside her in silence, letting the minutes stretch. And slowly, against her better judgment, Claire began to relax. They talked. About nothing at first. Books, places they had traveled, the best pizza slice in New York. She learned he had grown up poor before clawing his way into unimaginable wealth. She learned he slept with the windows open because he couldn't stand the feeling of being caged, and he learned, without her meaning to tell him, that she loved old movies, that she still dreamed of becoming a writer, that she carried guilt like a second skin. As the night wore on, the distance between them shrank until there was none at all. When Lucas kissed her, it wasn't the brutal, claiming thing she had braced for. It was gentle, slow, a question, not a command. Claire answered without thinking, without fear, surrendering, not to his money or his power, but to the quiet truth of the moment. They made love in the soft glow of the city lights, a tangle of whispered promises neither dared to speak aloud. It wasn't about the contract. It wasn't about the $1 million folded in an envelope on the kitchen counter. It was about two broken people finding solace in each other, if only for a night. After they lay tangled together on the couch, the city stretching out beyond, the windows, infinite and indifferent. Claire stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything she had just done settle over her. She had sold a piece of herself tonight, maybe more than she had intended. "You could have anyone," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "Why me?" Lucas turned his head, studying her in the half-light. "Because you're real," he said, simply. "Because you don't want anything from me." Claire laughed bitterly. "I want your money." "No," he said. "You want to save someone you love. That's not the same thing." She turned her face away, blinking back sudden tears. Lucas reached over and caught her hand, weaving their fingers together. "You saved me too, you know," he said quietly. "Tonight." Claire didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know how to tell him that she had already lost too much to believe in saving anyone. Not even herself. So she said nothing. But deep inside something shifted. Something terrifying. Something real. And as she drifted into a fitful sleep, against his chest she missed the look in Lucas's eyes. The way he watched her like she was something he never meant to find, but now couldn't imagine losing. Claire woke before dawn. The city's glow still faint against the edges of the skyline. Lucas had fallen asleep beside her, his arm draped protectively over her waist, his breath warm against the back of her neck. She lay still, afraid that even the slightest movement would shatter the fragile peace that had fallen between them. In the stillness, doubts gnawed at her. Had she made a mistake? Could one night really be enough to separate her heart from the man who had, in the span of a few stolen hours, seen more of her than anyone else had in years? She carefully slid out from under his arm, sitting up at the edge of the couch. Her clothes, crumpled and discarded, lay scattered across the floor, a visual reminder of the choices she had made, of the pieces of herself she had given away. But when she looked back at Lucas, so unguarded in sleep, she couldn't feel regret, only sadness, because no matter how gentle he had been, no matter how fiercely he had tried to shield her from the harshness of the transaction that had brought them together, it had still been a transaction. Claire gathered her things quietly. She left the unsigned check untouched on the coffee table, a silent refusal, even though she knew she needed it more desperately than she needed her pride. The memory of her mother's pale face, the mountain of unpaid bills, they followed her like phantoms as she tiptoed toward the door. Her hand hesitated on the knob. "Claire." His voice, rough with sleep, stopped her cold. She turned slowly. Lucas was awake, watching her with an unreadable expression. His hair was tousled, his chest bare, and for a moment he didn't look like a billionaire or a stranger. He looked like a man who was about to lose something he hadn't realized he needed. "You're leaving," he said, voice low. "I have to," she whispered, hating how her throat tightened. Lucas stood, crossing the room in 2 strides. He didn't touch her. He didn't even reach for her. He simply stood there, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. Claire shook her head. "We agreed. One night, no more." A muscle worked in his jaw. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He simply nodded once, the gesture sharp and full of unspoken pain. She opened the door. "Claire," he said one last time, his voice almost breaking. She turned back, imprinting his face into her. Memory. The longing. The regret. The raw vulnerability he would probably never show anyone else again. "Goodbye, Lucas," she said, and stepped into the cold hallway, closing the door between them. Claire didn't cry until she was blocks away, her breath fogging in the chill morning air. She pressed a hand to her heart, trying to hold herself together, because even though it was supposed to mean nothing, even though it was supposed to be just one night, it had already become something she would never forget. And Claire's days became a blur of motion after that night, each one folding into the next, with numbing sameness. She threw herself into work at the bookstore, picking up extra shifts, shelving endless rows of books with trembling hands, forcing a smile whenever a customer approached. To anyone watching, she might have seemed fine. Just another young woman, busy with life. But under the surface, a storm brewed quietly, steadily, eating away at the corners of her resolve. She told herself it didn't matter. Lucas Sterling was a world away from her now. Whatever momentary connection had sparked between them had been an illusion, a cruel trick played by loneliness and desperation. She had made her choice. She had left, and he had let her go. The wound was clean, surgical. And yet some nights, when the wind rattled her apartment windows and the city outside fell into an uneasy hush, she could still feel the warmth of his breath against her skin. Still hear the way he had said her name, low and broken, just before she'd walked out. Claire shook those memories away with the vicious efficiency of someone who had no room for dreams. Dreams didn't pay hospital bills. Dreams didn't buy her mother's medications. Dreams didn't matter. And yet fate has a curious way of laughing at the walls we build to protect ourselves. It happened a week later, on a Thursday afternoon thick with the slow suffocation of a New York summer. Claire had been restocking the store's front window, adjusting a crooked display of new arrivals when the door chimed behind her. She turned, brushing a stray lock of hair from her eyes, and froze. Lucas. He stood there, framed by the dusty light spilling through the doorway, wearing a navy suit that somehow looked both effortless and regal. His tie was loosened slightly. At the neck, his sleeves pushed up just enough to reveal strong forearms. His hair was tousled like he had run his hands through it too many times. And there was an exhaustion about him that hadn't been there before. For a long, trembling second, neither of them moved. Then Claire found her voice. Barely. "What are you doing here?" Lucas's mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. It was something tighter, sadder. "Looking for you." Her heart slammed against her ribs hard enough that she thought he might hear it. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. He stepped closer slowly, as if afraid she might bolt. "Maybe not, but I couldn't stay away." Claire shook her head, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "We made a deal." "I know." His voice was raw. "One night, no strings." "Exactly." Another step. She could smell the faint, clean scent of him, like rain and something darker, richer. "I lied, Claire," he said softly. She stared at him, stunned. Lucas swallowed hard. "I told myself it would be just one night, that I could let you walk away and it wouldn't matter." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "But it did. It does." Claire felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling under her feet. She couldn't let herself fall. She couldn't. "Lucas, you don't know what you're saying." "I do." He was so close now she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You're in my head. Every hour, every minute. I can't think straight without you." Claire squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head fiercely. "This isn't real. It was never supposed to be real." She opened her eyes, expecting anger, maybe even contempt. Instead, she found something far more dangerous. Hope. "I know you're scared," Lucas said quietly. "Hell, I'm terrified too, but Claire..." He took her hands in his, their touch warm and grounding. "Don't push me away before we even have a chance." She wanted to. God, she wanted to shove him back and run. It would have been easier, safer. But standing there, feeling the tremble in his fingers, seeing the vulnerability in his face, Claire realized something terrifying and beautiful. She wasn't alone anymore. Against her better judgment, she let him pull her hands up to his chest where she could feel the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "We can't change the past," he murmured. "But maybe we can build something new." Claire felt her defenses cracking, splintering under the sheer sincerity in his voice. "What if you regret this?" she asked, her voice breaking. Lucas smiled then. Not the cold, practiced smile of a CEO, but a slow, earnest curve of his lips that made her knees weak. "I already regret letting you go once." The bookstore door chimed again, breaking the fragile bubble around them. A customer entered, and Claire instinctively stepped back, pulling her hands from his. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he nodded, understanding. "I'll wait outside," he said, and turned away without another word. Claire stood frozen for a long moment, heart hammering in her chest, before forcing herself back to work. But the words she spoke to customers were mechanical, her mind spinning in 1,000 dizzy circles. He waited for over an hour, leaning casually against a lamppost, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. When Claire finally emerged, the sun was beginning to dip behind the buildings, casting everything in a burnished gold. He pushed off the post and approached her, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Dinner?" he asked simply. Claire hesitated. Every sensible part of her screamed at her to say no. But the bigger, louder part, the part that still felt his touch like a brand on her skin, nodded. Okay. They didn't go to one of Lucas's usual haunts, the kind of places with white tablecloths and prices that didn't dare appear on the menu. Instead, he took her to a tiny hole-in-the-wall Italian place nestled on a side street, where the walls were lined with faded family photos and the air smelled of garlic and fresh basil. They sat in a booth tucked away in a corner, sipping cheap wine from mismatched glasses. And for the first time in what felt like years, Claire laughed. Really laughed. Lucas told her about growing up in Boston, the son of a steel magnate who had barely noticed him except when handing down orders. About the years he had spent clawing his way out from under his father's shadow, determined to build something of his own. Clare shared stories of her childhood in Vermont, of long summers spent swimming in muddy lakes and winters bundled in hand-me-down sweaters. They talked about everything and nothing. And somewhere between the laughter and the confessions, something shifted. Lucas reached across the table, lacing his fingers through hers. "I don't want just one night," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I want every night," Claire's throat tightened painfully. "I don't know if I can be who you need me to be," she whispered. "You already are," he said simply. They left the restaurant hand in hand, the city buzzing around them. Lucas walked her back to her apartment, his thumb tracing slow, lazy circles over the back of her hand. When they reached her door, Clare turned to him, searching his face for any hint of uncertainty, any sign that this was a mistake. There was none. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent, and kissed her. Not with the hungry desperation of that first night, but with something deeper, something that tasted like a promise. Clare clung to him, letting herself believe just for this moment that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not giving up on us," he said fiercely. "Not now, not ever." Clare closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks, and for the first time in years she dared to hope. Hope that love didn't always have to come with pain. Hope that sometimes, against all odds, the broken pieces of two people could fit together into something whole, something beautiful, something worth fighting for. As they stood there beneath the glow of the flickering street lamp, the sounds of the city fading into a gentle hum around them, Clare knew that the decision before her was no longer about fear. It was about faith. Faith in herself. Faith in the man standing before her with eyes so full of quiet determination. Lucas didn't press her for more that night. Instead, he pressed a soft kiss against her forehead, lingering for a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to anchor himself to her, then stepped back. "Good night, Clare," he said, his voice low, rough with unspoken promises. "Good night." "Lucas," she whispered back, her fingers curling into the hem of her sweater as she watched him turn and walk away. Inside her apartment, Clare leaned against the door, closing her eyes. Her chest ached in that bittersweet way that only came from wanting something so badly it hurt. She wasn't naive. She knew love was messy, complicated, and often cruel. But for the first time in what felt like forever, the idea of risking. Her heart didn't seem like foolishness. It felt like survival. The next morning, Clare woke to find a small package resting against her door. No note, no explanation. Just a simple white box tied with a navy ribbon. Her heart hammering, she untied it, lifting the lid carefully. Inside was a first edition copy of The Secret Garden, a book she had once told Lucas was her favorite as a child, a story about hope blooming in the most barren places. Tucked inside the front cover was a single line, handwritten in neat, slanted script. "Everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. Let's find ours together." Clare pressed the book to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. No grand gestures, no extravagant displays. Just a quiet offering, a promise stitched into the pages of a story she had loved when life had still felt simple. That afternoon, she found herself walking through Central Park, the book tucked under her arm, her thoughts tangled and restless. She sat on a bench beneath an ancient oak tree, the summer breeze lifting her hair, and opened the book to that single line over and over again. Could she do it? Could she truly let herself believe again? The world around her bustled on. Joggers, mothers pushing strollers, children laughing as they chased pigeons. Life moved forward, oblivious to her turmoil. But somehow it made the decision clearer. Life didn't wait for permission. It didn't hold itself back for fear of getting hurt. Neither would she. Clare pulled out her phone, her hands trembling, and typed a message. "Dinner tonight? My place?" The reply came almost immediately. "I'll bring the wine." 7 p.m. The rest of the day passed in a blur of nerves and quiet anticipation. She cleaned her tiny apartment twice, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. She fussed over what to wear, finally settling on a simple navy sundress that she had always loved but rarely wore. When the doorbell rang, Clare's heart leapt into her throat. Lucas stood there with a bottle of wine in one hand and a bouquet of daisies in the other. Awkward, endearing, nothing like the powerful tycoon the world believed him to be. "Hi," he said, a little breathless, a little unsure. "Hi," Clare whispered, stepping aside to let him in. They spent the evening cooking together, bumping elbows in the small kitchen, laughing when Lucas fumbled the spaghetti sauce and ended up with a bright red stain on his pristine white shirt. It was messy. It was imperfect. And it was perfect. Later, they sat cross-legged on the floor, eating pasta from mismatched bowls, their knees brushing, their laughter soft and easy. Lucas looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in the air between them. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "I'm not asking for forever, Claire," he said, his voice rough. "Not yet. Just let's start with tonight and see where it goes." Claire felt her throat tighten again, but this time the tears that burned behind her eyes were different. Not from fear, but from something warmer, braver, hope. She smiled, a small tremulous thing, but real. "Okay," she whispered. "Tonight." Lucas leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. "Tonight," he echoed, and somewhere deep inside her, Claire felt the smallest, most precious thing begin to bloom, a fragile garden of hope, stubborn and wild, reaching for the light. Somewhere deep down she knew. This was only the beginning. The sun was setting low behind the Manhattan skyline, painting the sky in molten shades of gold and rose. Claire stood by the narrow window of her apartment, her fingers curled around a chipped coffee mug, staring without truly seeing. Tonight felt different. There was a tension humming in the air, something undeniable that had been building between her and Lucas ever since that first night. The night she let hope breathe into the hollow spaces of her chest. Lucas hadn't rushed her. He hadn't demanded anything. Instead, he had shown up again and again with quiet persistence, offering small pieces of himself. A late-night walk through the city, an unexpected lunch on a rainy afternoon, phone calls just to hear her voice when he was away on business. In those stolen moments, Claire saw the man beneath the polished armor, the man who craved connection as much as she did, even if he didn't yet know how to ask for it. Tonight, though, Claire sensed something would change. She didn't know. What? Only that she had reached a crossroads. She could no longer pretend their feelings were casual, that her heart wasn't steadily losing ground every time Lucas smiled. That rare, real smile meant only for her. At exactly 7 p.m., there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, Lucas stood there, more striking than she remembered, dressed down in a simple grey sweater and jeans. In his hands, he held a small battered pizza box and 2 paper cups of coffee. Claire blinked, laughter bubbling in her throat. "This is your grand plan for tonight?" she teased, stepping aside to let him in. Lucas grinned, a boyish heart aching grin she rarely saw. "Best pizza in the city. Thought you deserved something better than my terrible cooking." As they sat cross-legged on the floor, the city humming beneath them, Claire marveled at how natural it felt. No pretense, no walls. Just 2 people trying to figure out how to heal the broken parts of themselves in each other's company. Between bites of greasy pepperoni and sips of lukewarm coffee, they talked, really talked. Lucas told her about his childhood in Boston, growing up under the heavy shadow of expectations and privilege, about a father who measured love in achievements, a mother who disappeared into charity galas and designer peels. Claire listened. Her, heartbreaking in slow, quiet increments. "I was always chasing something I couldn't catch," Lucas admitted, his voice low. "Approval, worth, something to prove I wasn't just empty inside." "You're not empty," Claire said fiercely, the words slipping out before she could second-guess them. "You're more than your last name, more than your money." For a moment, Lucas looked at her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. Then he reached for her hand across the pizza box, his touch tentative, almost reverent. "Don't want to be that man anymore, Claire. Not when I'm with you." She swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "Then don't be." It wasn't a grand confession. It wasn't a sweeping promise. It was something far rarer, a beginning built not on illusions, but on truth. They didn't need fancy dinners or sweeping declarations. In that tiny apartment, with the smell of pepperoni lingering in the air and the soft strains of Billie Holiday, playing from Claire's ancient record player, they found something far more precious, a connection. Later, when the night deepened and the city lights cast long, drowsy shadows across the floor, Lucas helped her clean up, stacking plates and folding napkins with a care that made Claire's chest ache. As she reached for the last paper cup, the hands brushed and she froze. So did he. For a heartbeat, they simply stood there, the air between them thick with something unspoken. Then Lucas lifted his hand, hesitated, and cupped her cheek with a gentleness that unraveled whatever defenses Claire had left. "I'm scared too," he whispered, as if confessing a sin. Claire leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. Then we'll be scared together. When their lips finally met, it wasn't desperate or frenzied. It was slow, tender, a kiss that spoke of all the fears they had yet to voice, all the hopes they dared not name. Lucas's hands were steady on her waist, grounding her, anchoring her to a world that had shifted under her feet. The kiss deepened, grew more urgent, but Lucas pulled back first, resting his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. I don't want to rush this, he said hoarsely. I want to do this right. Claire nodded, tears slipping free despite herself. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever chosen patience over possession. They spent the rest of the night curled up on the worn couch, tangled together in the dim light, talking about everything and nothing. Claire told him about her dreams, about opening a community, center for underprivileged kids, about writing a book someday. Lucas listened, truly listened, his thumb stroking lazy circles along the inside of her wrist. She didn't know when she fell asleep, only that when she woke in the grey light of dawn, Lucas was still there, holding her as if she were the only thing anchoring him to this earth. For the first time in years, Claire felt something she had thought lost forever. Safe. The days that followed blurred into a strange, heady mixture of hope and fear. Lucas continued to weave himself into her life in ways big and small. He brought her coffee before early meetings, left notes tucked into the pages of her books, learned how she liked her tea and how she hated mornings. He never demanded more than she could give. Instead, he built a foundation, brick by careful brick, until the fortress Claire had built around her heart began to crumble. But trust, once broken, is not rebuilt overnight. One evening, as they sat on the fire escape sharing a bottle of cheap wine, Lucas turned to her, his expression unusually serious. I want you to meet my family, he said. Claire nearly dropped her glass. Lucas, they're a mess, he said quickly, grimacing. You'll hate them. Honestly, I hate half of them. But I want you there. I want them to see. He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. I want them to see the woman who saved me. Claire's heart stuttered painfully in her chest. It wasn't that she didn't want to be part of his world. It was that she was terrified of not belonging to it. But looking into Lucas's eyes, seeing the vulnerability he rarely let anyone glimpse, Claire realized something vital. She wasn't the same woman who had once believed she was unworthy of love. She had changed. He had changed her. And maybe, just maybe, she had changed him too. Claire set down her glass, took a deep breath and reached for his hand. Okay, she said, let's do it. Lucas's smile, wide, unguarded, blinding, was her reward. As the city slept beneath them and the stars flickered like fragile promises overhead, Claire allowed herself to believe, if only for tonight, that maybe she could have everything she had once been too afraid to want. Maybe she could have a future, a family, a love worth fighting for, with Lucas, with the man who had once offered her $1 million for a single night, but who, without even realizing it, had given her something infinitely more valuable, his heart, and without knowing it, Claire had given him hers in return. Claire stood by the window, gazing out at the lights of New York shimmering like fallen stars. Lucas was sitting on her couch, flipping through an old photo album he had found stacked on the bookshelf. She watched him quietly, feeling the soft ache of emotions that didn't have names yet, something between fear, hope, and an aching tenderness she couldn't suppress. You were adorable, Lucas said, chuckling as he pointed to a photo of Claire, no more than 7, missing her 2 front teeth and clutching a prize-winning pumpkin. Claire rolled her eyes but smiled despite herself. That was my first and only claim to fame in elementary school. I was pumpkin queen for a day. Lucas turned to look at her, something soft and profound in his gaze. You were already winning hearts back then. She flushed, laughing, brushing away the compliment as she moved to sit beside him. The closeness between them was electric, but not the overwhelming, dizzying kind she had felt with other men in her life. It was grounding, safe. With Lucas, every moment felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. Tell me something, Lucas said after a moment, his voice quieter. If you could do anything, anything at all without worrying about money or expectations, what would you do? Claire blinked, caught off guard by the question. She thought for a moment, curling, her knees up onto the couch. I would open a little flower shop, she said finally, a wistful note in her voice. Somewhere quiet. Maybe Cape Cod or Charleston. Somewhere with sunshine and salty air. I'd sell wild bouquets and tiny potted succulents. Nothing fancy. Just beautiful, simple things. Lucas watched her intently, absorbing every word. Sounds. Perfect, he said. Claire turned to him. And you? If you weren't, running empires. Lucas gave a low laugh, raking a hand through his hair. I honestly don't know. I've spent so long chasing things I thought I was supposed to want. Power, influence, respect, that I never really asked myself what I wanted. He looked down at the photo album, tracing the edges absently. But lately, I think I'd want something simpler too. A life where I don't have to constantly fight. Somewhere peaceful, maybe even learn how to cook something edible for once. Claire laughed, the sound light and musical. Well, you did make spaghetti without burning down my kitchen, so you're off to a good start. They sat there for a while, trading small dreams, peeling back the layers they had both built around themselves. It was astonishing how easy it was, how natural. Later that evening, after Lucas had left with a lingering kiss pressed to her forehead, Claire lay awake staring at the ceiling. She realized she wasn't scared of him breaking her heart. She was scared that she was already falling. Days blurred into a comforting routine. Lucas would visit her after work, sometimes late at night when the city's noise had finally begun to fade. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing, their bond deepening in ways that felt both inevitable and terrifying. One Saturday, Lucas surprised her with a trip to the New York Botanical Garden. Claire was enchanted by the endless displays of blooming flowers, the winding pathways, the secret corners hidden by weeping willows. She darted ahead, her laughter trailing behind her like music, and Lucas followed, watching her with a look that spoke volumes. Under the arch of white wisteria, he caught up to her, grabbing her hand. Stay with me, Claire, he said suddenly, his voice raw. She turned to him, stunned. Lucas, not just tonight, he pressed. Not just for now. I want more. I want all of it. You. Claire's heart pounded wildly in her chest. She could feel the sincerity pouring off him in waves, shaking the carefully constructed defenses she had put up for years. But her fear still clung stubbornly. You don't know everything about me, she whispered. Then let me learn, Lucas said, pulling her hand to his chest right over his heart. Let me love every piece of you, even the broken ones. Tears blurred her vision. No one had ever said something like that to her before. Not without conditions. Not without expecting her to change, to bend, to become something smaller and quieter. Lucas wanted her. All of her. But before she could answer, reality intruded. Her phone buzzed angrily in her bag. Claire winced, pulling it out, only to see a familiar name flashing across the screen. Jeremy, her ex. Panic seized her. Memories rushed in. Jeremy's cold words, his manipulation, the way he had made her doubt her own worth. She hadn't heard from him in months. Why now? Lucas watched the color drain from her face. Everything okay? He asked carefully. Claire forced a brittle smile. Yeah, it's nothing. But Lucas wasn't fooled. He reached out, cupping her cheek. You don't have to lie to me. She swallowed hard, fighting the instinct to hide her hurt. It's just someone I should have cut out of my life a long time ago. Lucas's jaw tightened. If he's bothering you, Claire, I'll take care of it. No, she said quickly, placing a hand on his arm. I have to face this myself. That night, alone in her apartment, Claire stared at the phone clutched in her hand. Jeremy had left a voicemail, his voice oily and too familiar. He wanted to meet, said he missed her, said he knew about Lucas. Her stomach churned with dread. Could Jeremy ruin this fragile happiness she had only just begun to build? She had spent so long trying to outrun her past. Could she really believe that it wouldn't catch up with her now? The next day, Claire met Jeremy in a crowded cafe, choosing a seat by the window close to an exit. She needed to see for herself if he still had any power over her. He was as she remembered, charming on the surface, poison underneath. You look good, Claire, he said, flashing a too-white smile. Better than when you were with me, I guess. Claire said nothing, waiting. Jeremy leaned closer. You really think a guy like Lucas Blackwood wants you for real? He's playing you, Claire. Guys like him always are. Claire's hands curled into fists under the table. She took a steadying breath. I know what real looks like now, she said calmly. And it looks nothing like you. Jeremy's smile faltered, a flash of anger in his eyes. Stay away from me, Claire said, rising to her feet. And stay away from Lucas. If you come near either of us again, I won't just walk away quietly this time. As she strode out into the New York sunshine, Claire felt lighter than she had in years. She was done letting her past define her. She was ready for something new. Someone new. Lucas. When she reached home, Lucas was waiting outside her building, leaning casually against his car. The moment their eyes met, Claire broke into a run, flinging herself into his arms. He caught her effortlessly, holding her so tight she could hardly breathe, but she didn't want him to let go. "I choose you," she whispered against his chest, the words fierce and true. Lucas pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Always?" "Always," Claire said, tears slipping down her cheeks. He kissed her then, deep and tender, sealing a promise that no past could ever undo. For the first time in her life, Claire knew she wasn't running away anymore. She was running towards something, towards someone, toward a future she finally believed she deserved. The next few weeks in Venice Beach passed in a strange kind of limbo for Emilia Hart and Lucas Donovan. They were tied together by an invisible thread of secrets and unspoken truths, by the night they could never erase and the growing bond neither dared to name. Yet, while the world bustled and shimmered around them, their hearts wrestled with the emotions they could no longer ignore. Every morning, Emilia woke to the scent of fresh coffee Lucas would leave outside her door, a simple but wordless gesture that said more than any apology ever could. And every evening, she found herself searching for his tall figure across the beachside streets or at the marketplace, her heart beating too fast whenever she caught sight of him. But pride and fear kept her from reaching out first. Lucas, for his part, struggled against instincts he'd honed over a lifetime. Instincts that told him to control, to own, to dominate. But with Emilia, none of that worked. She was not a deal to be negotiated or a prize to be claimed. She was fierce, stubborn, full of life, and utterly determined to shield her heart and the small life growing inside her from any harm. One windy afternoon, Lucas found himself standing outside the bakery Emilia had started working at to make ends meet. Through the wide windows, he watched her laugh gently at something a customer said, her hand unconsciously resting on her lower belly, where his child grew. A fierce surge of longing ripped through him, not just for her body, but for her trust, her heart, her belief that he could be something more than a man who had once bought her desperation. He knew he needed a different plan. If he wanted her to believe in him, in them, he had to become someone worth believing in. The opportunity came sooner than he thought. One evening, a violent storm swept across Venice Beach, flooding the streets and knocking out power across half the town. Emilia, alone in her small apartment, struggled to calm her frayed nerves as thunder rumbled overhead. She had never been particularly afraid of storms, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the hormones. Maybe it was the overwhelming loneliness. A sharp knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Lucas standing there, rainwater dripping from his hair, holding a flashlight and a paper bag. "I thought you might need these," he said gruffly, holding out the supplies. His voice was roughened by the cold air, but his gaze was gentle, almost pleading. Emilia hesitated for a long second, then stepped aside wordlessly to let him in. They sat together by candlelight in the small living room, sharing sandwiches and old memories, the storm raging outside. At some point, Lucas shed his soaked jacket, revealing a simple grey t-shirt that clung to his muscular frame. He looked less like the ruthless billionaire she had once feared and more like a man desperately trying to find his way back to something real. "You know," Lucas said after a long silence, his voice low, "I used to think that if you wanted something enough, you could just buy it. That money was the answer to everything." Emilia glanced at him, the candlelight casting shadows across his strong, tired face. "And now?" she asked softly. He met her gaze, and in his eyes she saw a rawness that shook her. "Now," he whispered, "I know that the things worth having can never be bought." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither dared to unpack. "Fully." Emilia felt her defenses crack just a little. This was not the man who had made her an offer in the darkness of a desperate night. This was someone else. Someone learning, changing, fighting his own demons for her. Before she could stop herself, she whispered, "I'm scared." Lucas leaned forward slightly. "Of me?" "Of everything," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Of hoping, of believing that this could be something more." Lucas didn't speak right away. He simply reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes," he said. "But I swear to you, Emilia, I will never walk away. Not from you, not from our child." At the mention of the baby, Emilia's breath caught. She had told herself she would raise this child alone, that it was safer that way. But sitting there, with Lucas's steady hand cradling her cheek and his heart laid bare before her, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to accept help, to accept love. Tears blurred her vision, and she blinked them away stubbornly. Lucas leaned in, resting his forehead against hers, and for a long moment they simply breathed each other in. No demands, no expectations, only fragile, tentative trust. The storm raged around them, but in that tiny apartment, something fierce and unbreakable was being forged, not through grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but through quiet, unspoken promises. When Lucas finally pulled back, he smiled. A real, unguarded smile that transformed his usually hard features into something achingly beautiful. "You don't have to do this alone anymore, Emilia," he said. She nodded slowly, a tiny, uncertain smile curling her lips. It wasn't a surrender. It was a choice. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp, washed-clean world. Emilia woke to the sound of bacon sizzling and the scent of coffee brewing. Blinking in confusion, she padded into the small kitchen to find Lucas, clumsily but determinedly, making breakfast. He glanced over his shoulder with a sheepish grin. "I don't know if this counts as edible, but it's the thought that counts, right?" She laughed, a real laugh, bubbling up from a place that hadn't known true joy in far too long. As they sat down to eat, the baby kicked for the first time. Emilia gasped, her hands flying to her belly, her eyes wide with wonder. Lucas froze, watching her, then reached out tentatively. "May I?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She nodded, and he placed his large, calloused hand over hers, feeling the faint flutter against his palm. His eyes went wide, stunned awe replacing all his usual arrogance. "That's incredible," he whispered. Tears filled Emilia's eyes again, but this time they were tears of hope. Maybe love wasn't always easy. Maybe it wasn't always pretty or convenient. Maybe it was messy and terrifying and full of risks. But as Lucas leaned over and pressed a reverent kiss to her growing belly, Emilia knew, deep in her heart, that it was worth it. Every second, every mistake, every chance. She wasn't alone anymore. Neither was he. And for the first time in both their lives, the future looked brighter than they had ever dared to dream. The days in Florence melted into one another as if time itself had slowed, allowing every stolen glance, every shared smile between Eleanor Monroe and Adrian Cole to linger a little longer than it should. The city, with its timeless beauty and aching romance, became the perfect backdrop for something neither of them had dared to name yet. Something delicate but undeniable. Each morning, Eleanor awoke to the soft sounds of the bustling streets outside. Her window. Vendors called out from colorful market stalls. The aroma of fresh bread and rich coffee filled the air, and the distant bells from the Duomo marked the passing of the hours. Yet despite the vibrant life of the city, her heart remained tethered to Adrian. Every day she told herself to be cautious, to remember the deal they had made, to keep her emotions locked away. But each time she saw him, something inside her unraveled a little more. Adrian, for his part, was no longer the cold, detached CEO the world knew. With Elena, he found himself laughing without restraint, confessing small truths about himself he hadn't shared with anyone. He found joy in the simplest things, the way Elena would wrinkle her nose when something amused her, or how she would lose herself admiring a piece of street art. And perhaps most dangerously, he found peace, a peace he hadn't believed he deserved. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the terracotta roofs and bathed the city in hues of pink and gold, Adrian suggested they take a walk through the Bobbly Gardens. Eleanor hesitated for a moment instinctively, wary of what time alone with him under such a breathtaking sky might stir in her. But she found herself agreeing. The gardens were nearly deserted at that hour. They wandered through paths lined with ancient statues and fragrant blooms, their conversation easy and light at first. But as they reached a secluded terrace overlooking the city, silence settled between them, comfortable, expectant. Adrian leaned against the stone railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I never thought I'd end up here," he said, voice low. "Not just Florence. I mean, here, with you." Eleanor's heart stuttered. She wrapped her arms around herself, fighting the shiver that wasn't from the evening chill. "It's unexpected," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to her then, the soft glow of sunset casting golden highlights in his dark hair. There was something raw in his expression, something vulnerable. "I made you a deal," he said slowly. "A transaction. But I find myself wishing there had never been any deal at all." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Elena wanted to say something, anything, but her throat tightened painfully. She had come into Adrian's life desperate, willing to trade a night of her dignity for her father's surgery. She had never imagined that in the process she might lose something even more precious: her heart. Without thinking, she reached out and brushed her fingers against his hand resting on the stone. It was the lightest of touches, but Adrian froze, as if she had struck him. His hand turned, capturing hers, his fingers threading through hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "Elena," he murmured, his voice rough. "I'm not a good man. I never was." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "Don't say that." "I need you to understand," he said, pulling her hand to his chest over the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "I've built my life around control, around never needing anyone. But you," his voice broke, just a fraction. "You terrify me, because you make me want things I thought I'd buried long ago." Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks. She had never seen him like this, so open, so real. It broke something inside her and mended it all at once. "I'm scared too," she whispered. He smiled then, a small heartbreaking smile. "Good. That means we're both still alive." The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Slowly, Adrian leaned in. He gave her time to pull away, to change her mind. But she didn't. When their lips met, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, reverent, the kind of kiss that says everything words cannot. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he breathed. "Not because of the money, not because of anything but this." Elena closed her eyes, savoring the feel of him, the scent of him, the staggering rightness of it. She wanted to say yes. Every part of her screamed for it. But somewhere deep inside, the fear lingered. Could love born from such broken beginnings ever truly survive? The next few days passed in a blur of cautious happiness. They explored Florence together like two people seeing the world for the first time, visiting museums, lingering over long dinners, laughing over cheap gelato. For a while they forgot about reality, forgot about deals and obligations and the futures they had separately envisioned. But reality, relentless and patient, waited for its chance to intrude. It came in the form of a phone call. Elena had just returned from a morning stroll to find Adrian standing rigid in the middle of the suite, his phone pressed to his ear, his face grim. His knuckles whitened around the device as he listened, and when he finally ended the call, he didn't meet her eyes. "What is it?" she asked, her heart hammering. He hesitated. "The board. They know I've been distracted. There's pressure to return, to fix things before they spiral." Elena swallowed hard. "You have to go back." He nodded once. "I leave tomorrow." A knife twisted in her gut. She had known this moment would come, but she hadn't expected it to hurt this much. "What about us?" she asked, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. Adrian finally looked at her then, and the anguish in his eyes nearly undid her. He crossed the room in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. "There's no us without you," he said fiercely. "I'm not leaving you behind." Hope flared in her chest, wild and reckless. "Then take me with you." He hesitated, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. "Elena, I want to," he said, "more than anything. But your life, your dreams. I won't be the man who takes your freedom." Tears blurred her vision. "And what about my heart, Adrian? You already have that." He pulled her against him, holding her as if he could anchor them both against the inevitable. "I'm going to fix this," he vowed. "I'm going to find a way for us." That night they made love as if trying to memorize each other, to etch the feel of skin against skin into their very bones. It was not frantic or desperate, but slow, reverent, filled with whispered promises and silent tears. It was a goodbye and a beginning all at once. In the early dawn hours, Elena lay awake, tracing the lines of Adrian's face with her gaze, committing every detail to memory. She didn't know what the future held. All she knew was that she loved this man, with all his scars, all his darkness, all his desperate hope, and that love, for better or worse, had irrevocably changed her. When morning came, Adrian kissed her forehead and whispered, "Wait for me." And as he walked away, his figure disappearing into the morning mist, Elena clutched the blanket to her chest and whispered back, "Always, even if it broke her, even if the wait lasted a lifetime. Because when you find a love that deep, that true, you hold on with everything you have, and you never ever let go." The evening air in Florence grew cooler, but the warmth between Liana Summers and Cole Harrington only intensified. As the sun dipped behind the ancient stone rooftops, painting the sky in hues of burnt orange and soft lavender, Cole stood motionless in front of Liana, his heart pounding against his ribcage like a trapped bird desperate for release. For the first time in his carefully calculated life, he had no control over what came next. And for once, he didn't want any. Liana watched him quietly, her emerald eyes filled with a tenderness that made Cole's chest ache. She had every reason to run from him. After all, their entire connection had begun under the shadow of a transaction, a deal inked in desperation and survival. But somewhere along the line, amidst whispered conversations under starry skies and unexpected laughter shared over burnt pancakes in a hotel suite, something far purer had blossomed between them. Something real. Cole stepped closer, his voice low and almost trembling. "I don't want you because of a deal, Liana. I want you because when you're not near me, the world feels hollow." His admission hung between them, vulnerable and raw. Liana's breath hitched, the words she had longed to hear finally spoken aloud. Still, a part of her resisted, a small wounded voice whispering that dreams like these didn't belong to women like her. She had been fighting her whole life, to survive, to protect, to endure. She had never learned how to simply receive love. Seeing the hesitation in her eyes, Cole reached out carefully, as if approaching a fragile bird. He tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his fingertips grazing her skin with a reverence that stole her breath. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself." A tear slid down Liana's cheek, followed by another. She didn't even try to hide them. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in a future that wasn't dictated by fear or desperation. She allowed herself to believe in him. Cole smiled softly, his thumb brushing her tears away. "Come with me," he whispered. "Not just tonight, not just tomorrow, for every tomorrow after." The enormity of his promise left her trembling. She had walked through fire alone for so long. Could she dare to step into the unknown with someone else? Could she believe that Cole Harrington, the man who could have any woman in the world, truly wanted her, scars and all? "Why me?" she finally whispered, her voice breaking. He took a steadying breath, his forehead resting against hers. "Because when you smile, it feels like I'm seeing sunlight for the first time in 20 years. Because when you hurt, I hurt. Because loving you is the most terrifying and natural thing I've ever done." There, under the sweeping Florence sky, amidst the ghosts of history and dreams of 1,000 lovers before them, Liana let her last defenses fall. She wrapped her arms around Cole's neck, anchoring herself to the only thing that had ever truly felt like home. "I don't want to run anymore," she murmured. "You'll never have to," he vowed, sealing his promise with a kiss that was as tender as it was fierce, a kiss that tasted of redemption, hope, and forever. Weeks passed and the seasons slowly shifted from the heavy heat of late summer into the crisp coolness of autumn. Florence transformed with the change, its golden streets dusted with amber leaves, its markets brimming with the smells of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon. For Cole and Liana, each day was a discovery, a slow, beautiful unfolding of the life neither had dared to dream about before. It wasn't all effortless. They had their disagreements, clashing sometimes like the headstrong souls they were. Cole struggled to shed the habits of control and calculation that had served him so well in business but had no place in matters of the heart. Liana grappled with trust, still learning to believe that someone wouldn't just take and leave. But every conflict was met with patience, every misunderstanding with a willingness to listen and heal. They were learning together. Cole found himself doing things he once thought beneath him, learning to make Liana's favorite coffee just the way she liked it, getting flour all over his designer suits as they attempted baking classes, staying up late to help her sketch out dreams for a community art program she had long envisioned but never had the means to pursue. Liana too grew. She began to believe she could be more than her past, more than the woman who had once accepted money in a moment of desperate need. With Cole's quiet encouragement, she enrolled in design courses, reviving her love for creativity that had lain dormant for so long. Their home, a restored villa nestled in the rolling hills of Tuscany, became a sanctuary. It wasn't the marble, the art, or the grandeur that made it special. It was the laughter echoing off the old stone walls, the soft hum of two hearts that had finally found a rhythm together. One evening, as the first fire of the season crackled, in the hearth, Cole knelt before her again. Not with a contract, not with an offer, but with a simple velvet box. "I promised you more than one night," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want every morning, every storm, every sunset with you. Marry me, Liana." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy, not pain. She nodded, unable to find her voice at first. When she did, it was a whisper carried by the flames and the stars. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They married in a small, breathtaking ceremony overlooking the hills, with only a handful of their closest friends and family. It wasn't the grand event the tabloids had predicted for Cole Harrington. It was better. It was real. When Liana walked toward him down the aisle, her hair woven with tiny wildflowers, her eyes glowing with unshed tears, Cole felt something he hadn't believed he could ever feel again. Utter breathtaking peace. This was not the life he had planned. It was better. Because love, messy, terrifying, vulnerable love, had rewritten all the rules he thought were unbreakable. And for Liana, love had given her something even more precious than security. It had given her a home. In his arms, she had found the safety she had craved. In her laughter, he had found the redemption he hadn't known he needed. And together they had found what every soul secretly longs for but so few dare to believe in. A love that was never for sale. A love that would endure, not because it was easy, but because they chose it every single day, forever.